I moved up to Utah in 1997, 98. And I was in music before that a lot in Canada. I played in a number of bands in Canada, recorded some stuff. And when I moved out here basically permanently, um, I knew I still needed to play music. I needed to be in a band still. So I wandered around for a little bit and played in some other bands, blues bands and some other stuff. And then decided that, I had some stuff that I had written and it'd be nice to, get a band together that could do some covers and play some original stuff. So I started a band and it went through a couple of name changes and eventually ended up with Betty Hates Everything as the name of the band.
Betty Hates Everything is the band that I'm in. I play the bass. And I came into the band with a friend that I'd known for a while, playing around the same music scene for years. And we had jammed together a few times. And he dropped a tape off at a gig I was playing one time and said, "Give this thing a listen, let me know what you think. We're looking for a bass player." And I threw it into my glove box, and it was about 2 weeks later I finally popped it in and listened to it. And I immediately called T and I said, yeah, I want to be part of this. And they had already had most of an album written. And we started playing those songs along with some covers, and we played together for about 2 years through a couple of different drummers before we finally had about a dozen songs, and we went and recorded those and made our first album. Believe It was called. And I'm really proud of it. It's a different sound than what we have now. We've evolved since then, but about half of the songs on the album I was involved in the creation of, and every time I hear them I just get excited. I love what we came up with, and it was my first time in the studio. It was my first time really getting all that hard work and putting it together, and then having something to hold on to at the end, as opposed to we had a great show last week, or, hey, do you remember that show in '86, how good that was? We actually had something that we could hold on to, and it's one of my proudest moments.
Betty Hates Everything, I answered an ad. So I basically had retired from playing after living in Los Angeles and trying to be a drummer for however many years. And I came up to Utah and I was in a townhome, so I couldn't set up a drum set. And then I got a house and I set up the drum set. And I remember when I set up the drum set in the drum set room, I was like, gosh, what am I going to do? Am I going to shut the door and it'll just be like a museum of my old playing days, or am I going to play? And it took me a minute, but I started going, you know what, I'm just going to play whatever I want for a half an hour. That was my deal. Every day I'll just get down. I don't have to learn songs. I'm not working on my shuffle or something that I felt like I was always working on in LA. Then about a year into that, I was like, well, I'm getting pretty good at this, and no one's ever going to hear it, right? So I was like, maybe I should join a band, which is how it all starts. And I saw an ad for Betty Hates Everything in something in Salt Lake.
City Week.
Yeah, and I went out on 2 auditions. One was a funk band. As a kid, I grew up in San Francisco Bay Area, and I always enamored with funk music. Horn bands, Tower Power, Earth, Wind and Fire. That music in the Bay Area was a big part of the Bay Area. So now I'm like, oh, I'll join a funk band. I auditioned for a funk band, and I auditioned for Betty Hates Everything. And I remember trying to be all prepared for the audition, and so I ended up talking to T and going down for an audition, and we jammed, and it was like it. At that point, I didn't really care. I was like, I'd played in LA, and I'd played for some people that, maybe were actors and had money, and they'd pay you for $100 for a rehearsal, and they were miserably bad. They were better actors. But I took the money, I was trying to make a living, right? But so in this scenario, I was like, I want everyone to be good players and good humans, because if this ain't fun, why the fuck am I going to drive down the hill? It's got to be fun. So, and then everybody was fun, and the rest is history. I think we're now in the Hall of Fame in Utah.
I joined Betty, 4 years ago now. almost.
Has it been 4 years?
Just about. I think I joined in October of 2016, something like that, and yeah. So I've been kind of a unit in the band for a bit now, which is cool. Yeah, I've been in all sorts of other bands too. I was in another band called The Last Wednesday, which is actually where I met Betty Hates Everything. So I started promoting for this place called Hooga, and I met these guys there. I was doing this unplugged thing called Wednesday Unplugged. Every Wednesday we would do it, and these guys would always come in, and we'd all jam, you know. And one day I just we were sitting around and we were like, why don't we start a band, you know? And that was The Last Wednesday was like born. But that was when I met Betty Hates Everything, and you know, we did like a little, that's funny, we call it a tour. It was like 4 shows, I think. It was like 2 shows here and then 2 shows up, I think, in Idaho. And it was a blast. We had such a ball. And I remember hearing you guys and just being like, these guys are fucking, they got this set. Like, I love the 90s and 2000s kind of like era of music. And you guys just were like, that was your sound. And it was like, you guys covered Creed, and I was like, oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. That's exactly the sound, you know. And flash forward, obviously, you know what, 7 years later, 8 years later, whatever, here we are. And a lot of my, I think, vocal and like lyric writing influences kind of stem from that 90s kind of vibe.
I don't really write a lot. I make riffs and then I give them to my singer and my bass player, who then write songs around those riffs. and then I just have a lot of fun playing the parts and making the music. So you know, that's the band. And you know, I think initially that, you know, I always had these dreams of grandeur. You know, like, let's start a band and go original and get signed, and old school thinking, right? Because that's, you know, shit doesn't happen like that anymore. So I'm, you know, and you look at some of the bands that are even local here that have had so much chaos and problems with that kind of world, you know. And then I think, you know, you Dan, you know, being in the band kind of brought the idea of this digital environment to us, you know, and said, you know, we don't have to do that. We can actually be a really popular band in an electronic media world, you know, in a social media world. And it changed the way I looked at things, you know, and went, yeah, you know, you're absolutely right, because there's so many things that happen electronically. So it was kind of an interesting change of the heart, I guess, of what I thought I really wanted a band to be, because I grew up in the 80s, you know, listening to big hair bands, and that's what you did, right? You toured, you made albums, and you toured, right? I started playing folk music when I first started playing guitar back when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and you know, I was a churchgoer, I was Catholic, and so I went to church a lot, and they had folk bands back in the 70s. Folk bands are a lot different than what they do now, I think, in the churches, because I really haven't kept up with choral music, but the you know, in those days, you know, the guys that wrote the music for the churches in the folk environment, they were like Jesuit priests that wandered the world with guitars and wrote stuff, you know. And then you know, and then so, you know, when we did that, you know, when I started playing in churches, I learned how to play chords and instruct chord structures and different chords like D minor sevenths and stuff, as opposed to just a D, or, you know, and I learned from people that played around me that were really good musicians, you know. And then you know, of course, the era in the early 80s and late 70s was the era for me, was Van Halen, you know, and listening to that kind of music, you know, and all the bands of that era, that period, were all like killer bands, you know, Iron Maiden and all those bands, Judas Priest. I listened to all that stuff, you know, and so guitar was really fascinating to me. Acoustic guitar was not anymore. It was electric and overdriven, you know, Marshall sounds and things that just, you know, I got way into the electronics, like what makes it sound right, you know. So my influences were probably like some of those musicians of that period, you know, Tommy Shaw and guys that played, you know, like Eddie Van Halen, of course, and you know, like nowadays, that I guess one of my favorite guys is Mark Tremonti. You know, these guys that played in those days were, I wouldn't say virtuosos necessarily, like a Canadian influence, because living in Canada, I had Kim Mitchell was a Canadian influence for me. You know, they just knew their scales really well, you know, and you would listen to it and go, how do these guys do that? But really, it's just moving through the scales. And I never thought about that, because I was self-taught, right? I never thought about, I'm going to go through the scales, you know. And so now I'm starting to get that, you know. Like the last few years, I've been like, I'm going to do scale work, you know, and like 3 notes per string scale, you know, or stuff like that, where you move through these and it's been influencing the way I play more, I think, definitely.
Well, probably the first guy, not probably, for sure, John Bonham was, me and every other drummer grew up figuring out why John Bonham was so awesome. And at one point I could play, at least I thought, every single thing he played, and I thought I did a good job, but I don't know if I could do it now. Every once in a while I'll go listen to Zeppelin and go, oh, yeah, I'd have to actually listen to this again. But then I got into more drummers, right? David Garibaldi, Tower of Power comes to mind. I studied a little bit with him in LA, and he was a great guy. And my dad took me to see Buddy Rich. I was like, John Bonham's the greatest drummer in the world. And my dad, who also played drums, was like, oh yeah? Come with me. And we went up to San Francisco, and I saw Buddy Rich play, and I was like so humbled, like, oh my God, I didn't know you could do this. There was a guy named Ansley Dunbar that played in Journey before Steve Smith. And I saw him in the Bay Area quite a few times, and I think he's one of those underrated, well, drummers know about him, but he ended up in Whitesnake and played on Still of the Night, stuff like that. And he was badass. He's an English guy, and he was another one. So my rock guys were Bonham and then Ansley Dunbar, and then I went off and started listening to the more fusion guys, right? It's funny, I saw Buddy Rich, but I never was like, oh, I gotta learn to play like that. It was, it's like saying I don't know, what's the analogy? I'm in second grade and I want to be a rocket scientist. He was so, it was more like, I don't understand how anybody could do that. And I still think that.
I've played music since I was about 5 years old. My mom, I wanted to be a drummer. Oh man, all I wanted to do was play the drums. My mom said, you'll make a great drummer one day. Take piano lessons first. And gosh, she forced me to sit on that piano bench for about 4 or 5 years. And I enjoyed it for about a week. And the next 47 weeks were just not fun. But I learned music theory, and I learned the math of a keyboard, which I've translated into guitar and bass. I played the saxophone. I picked up, my mom had an old Spanish guitar in the house. She taught me how to play "You Are My Sunshine." Those 3 chords just kind of took me to where I am now. But that's been a long time I've been playing music. When I was 13 years old, my brother brought home an Iron Maiden album, and I listened to it, and I'd never heard anything like that in my life. I thought, what is that, and how can I do that? And it was the bass, it was the click of that bass, and the rhythm, and the melodies that guy played, and I didn't even know what a bass guitar was. And I just fell in love with it, and many bass players will tell you, Steve Harris is the one that started me on bass, and he was for me. But then I started listening to bands like AC/DC, where the bass player sits in a pocket, and he and the drummer, they just hold the whole thing together very simply. And so I try to remember that when I'm thinking of all these really cool licks I can play. That you gotta hold it together, and in Betty Hates Everything, I get a chance to do that. But also with the style of stuff we're doing and the way that I work together with T, the guitar player, a lot of times we'll double up on some things and we'll play harmony licks together, and it's just, it's really nice the way it all comes together. So in all the years I've been playing music, in the last 5 or 6 years I've really started to learn to play with other musicians much better than I did in the past.
Melody really influences everything in a song, I think, when I write a chord progression, let's say, I hear something in the chord progression, but I'm not really good at expressing the melody in a chord progression. I just hear a cool chord progression, and that's my expression. And then what's really interesting is when you guys hear that and you go, oh, I hear this melody over that chord progression, and I think for example, your influence coming into the band, where you're much more, I think, upbeat and more, I guess, progressive and poppy too. I think a little bit, you know. I think because you've got that influence, it allows us to kind of express ourselves still in a heavy way, I think, but a much more, I think, communicative way. Like, people are drawn to the sound. You can take any one of the songs that we've been writing since you've been in the band, and it doesn't matter what mood you're in. You can listen to that song, you know, and you can identify with it, and you can dig it, you know, like it can move you from places, you know. I think it's going to attract a different audience, but I think it's going to be a broader audience, if that makes sense. You know?
I also do a lot of acoustic stuff too, so it's not just, I'm in a bunch of different projects as well, so I sing a lot of different stuff, and I think that honestly, you know, feeds into a lot of like how our sound is very different, because I'll bring in kind of quick lyrics to quick happy lyrics to like a slow sad song, to make it so that everybody can kind of listen to it and go, this is something cool, you know, there's something to this, no matter what mood they're in, you know. I don't see myself as really as a musician. I don't like using the word musician because that implies that like there's sort of a writing taking place, and I would say there's more of a channeling taking place. Like there's sort of, it's all like done up here, and like what happens isn't what's up here either, but it is what's right, I think, you know. And so like it's sort of our job as musicians to sort of channel that kind of magic that's sort of in there out, right? And so I like to call myself a feeling creator. I create feelings. I don't really create music, because that's what music is it's feelings. And so if I create a sad song and then I put happy lyrics over it, you know, that shifts sort of the perspective in which maybe the song was started into this positive thing. It also works the other way too. You can do it the other way, you know, and there's a lot of bands that do that. They'll put, you know, poppy, happy stuff to sort of depressing. Like Counting Crows is a perfect example of, you know, a band who can put some really happy stuff to some pretty bummer lyrics, you know. And you know, Counting Crows is another great influence. John Mayer is probably one of my biggest influences, both musically and sort of in a production sense.
I think it's super fun and every band member has more or less patience with this part, and I'm probably my own worst enemy on this. I can hear stuff. If it were totally up to me, I'd go, oh, cool. It's a rock song. Let's play it as a shuffle. Hey, what would happen if we played it in 3? Oh, what would... And I would go through a huge thing, but most people are like, what the fuck? No, it's not that. It's a rock song. And they're probably right. But I like the exploration of what could happen. I always like in a song, you know, the lyrics and melodies are obviously king, but I always like when something surprises me in a song, like some part that's syncopated that you go, I wonder who thought of that. How'd they come up with that? That really kind of separated the chorus and you know, the next verse, and I wouldn't have thought of that. And I've always looked for that a little bit, you know, short of being a fusion band where you're cute for cute's sake. Sometimes those guys are like, okay, only you know what's going on. Good for you. The rest of us. I once saw a Chick Corea project where, and I'm a trained musician. There were 4 guys playing, and I had no idea. I couldn't find the beat. I think it was a joke. It had to be a joke. Like, well, there were 4 guys playing 4 different things, and you're like, I can't hear anything that sounds like a song or a melody. So I like the part where it's really melodic, but maybe 1 or 2 things that kind of separate it from, you know, just a 12-bar blues or something that, you know, my dog left me. A lot of times I look to see the impact it'll have on the audience. So a lot of times I'm kind of amused to see what worked. what we worked out in a rehearsal, and we go, man, this is really going to get him. And then you play it, and you see a guy go to sleep and nod out, or guys get up and go get a beer, and you're like, yeah, we missed the boat on that one. Well, but simplicity a lot of times. So our song, the first one we released, now that the camera's on, I can't remember the name of it. Invisible Walls is probably the one that, makes people make faces. To me, a song has impact when people go, ooh. Yeah, they get weird faces, or their body moves, right? I go, yeah, that's working. The worst look out there, you look out there. I used to have a friend come that was like not musical at all, and in a sea of people, I could always find him because his face was just completely stone-faced, and I'm like, I appreciate you coming, but not like that. He didn't drink. He never let loose, and I always find those faces, like you're looking at your plane and you go, oh, don't look there. Do not look there any longer. That guy's enduring our performance.
Currently, with our new stuff, it's hard to pick a favorite. We have one called Turn It Up that I really like, the raw demo that we did. And as we produce it more, and it needs to be more produced to be radio friendly, if you will. But I liked when we were farting around and putting it together. We did some really cool stuff that may go away and end up on the cutting room floor. Effaced is a song that I really love. It's just rock, and I love in your face, straight ahead rock. It's not metal, it's not pop, it's just rock, which is really where I come from. And then we do have a poppy song. What's the name of that poppy song we do?
The Top Down.
Yeah, Drop Top
World.
World. So I don't know the words usually. I just learn the backup vocal parts. No, Drop Top World is real poppy, and when we play it, I kind of bounce and I jump and I dance, and it's about just partying in the summer, and that's what I'm all about, partying in the summer. So it's hard to pick a favorite. It's a new musical direction that we've gone in, and it's just an evolution. It wasn't a choice we made. It was just kind of where we've ended up, and I've enjoyed kind of the journey to get there, and where we're at now. Pick my favorite, can't.
I mean, these 10 songs we've done, or whatever, the ones we just finished, they're great. Like every time I play even a crappy version of one, like say like we didn't do it right, or we haven't finished it yet, or whatever, or like you're doing doo doo das in the song because you didn't have all the lyrics yet, right? Even when I play that for somebody, they go, that's a fucking killer tune, man, and it's not even close to being done yet, and they already think it's a killer song, So that's kind of where I see this has been moving, So
I'm really excited about where we're headed and what we're doing, and all I can say is just stay tuned. It's gonna be fun.